There is a moment just before the world fully opens its eyes when the air feels different. The birds have begun their quiet rehearsal, but the traffic has not yet started its argument. The notifications have not yet begun their urgent chorus. The demands of the day have not yet found your name, and in that thin, holy sliver of time, something extraordinary becomes possible. Something that most of us, if we are honest with ourselves, have allowed to slip away without ever truly reaching for it. We have been told at some point in our lives that prayer in the morning is a good habit. Perhaps someone handed us a devotional. Perhaps we downloaded an app. Perhaps we set an alarm and told ourselves that tomorrow would be different. But habit is not the same as encounter. Discipline is not the same as intimacy. And a religious routine, no matter how faithfully kept, is not the same as actually meeting God before the world wakes up. This is what we need to talk about today, not the mechanics of a quiet time, not a checklist for a better morning routine, but the living, breathing, soul-shaking reality of what it means to come to God in those early, unguarded hours and allow Him to anchor you, not just for the morning, but for everything the day will bring. Because the truth that most of us have not yet fully received is this: the quality of your morning meeting with God determines the quality of everything that follows. Not because God loves you more when you wake up early, not because He rewards the disciplined and punishes the weary, but because when you bring your soul to Him before the noise begins, He gets to shape the very lens through which you will see every moment that follows. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to do something. Right now, in the comments below this video, I want you to write this phrase: I am meeting God before the world wakes up. Not as a boast, not as a performance, but as a declaration, an act of faith spoken into the digital air, witnessed by thousands of others around the world who are hungry for the same thing you are. There is something sacred about saying out loud what you are reaching for, even before you have fully arrived there. Write it now. I will be looking for you in the comments. Here is what this journey is going to feel like. We are going to move through 10 teachings together, and each one is going to take you deeper into the geography of a soul that has learned, or is learning, to meet God at the threshold of the day. We are going to explore why the morning has always been holy in the economy of heaven. We are going to sit with people in the Bible who were broken in the night and met by God before the first full light. We are going to learn what it means to arrange your prayers like an altar, the way Psalm 5:3 describes, a picture so rich and so tender that once you see it, you will never read that verse the same way again. We are going to walk through the wilderness with Elijah, who was so depleted that he asked God to let him die. And we are going to hear with our own spiritual ears what God said to him in that desert. Not a sermon, not a rebuke, something so much quieter and so much more powerful than either of those things. This is also a journey toward a prayer. At the very end of this video, in the final teaching, there is a closing prayer waiting for you. I wrote it for the person who woke up this morning already tired, for the person who has been carrying something heavy for weeks or months or years, and who needs to hear God speak directly into that weight. Do not skip to the end. I am asking you to let each teaching build on the one before it, because by the time you arrive at that prayer, you will have been prepared to receive it in a way that would not be possible if you simply jumped to the final minutes. Let the journey do its work in you. If this channel is new to you, if you found this video through a search, or a friend sent it to you, or the algorithm brought you here in one of its mysterious ways, I want you to know that this community exists as a place of ongoing spiritual nourishment. Every week, we gather here around the Word of God, not to produce content, but to create space for encounter. Subscribing is not just a digital action. It is a way of saying, I want to keep meeting God in this place. It is a way of staying connected to a river that runs. If that speaks to something in you, let the subscribe button be the next thing your finger finds. There is something I want to tell you about the final teaching, Teaching 10, because I think it might be the reason you stay. I have spent more time on that section than on any other part of this script. It contains something that I believe has the power to reframe not just your morning practice, but your entire understanding of what God is doing in your life right now, in this season, with all of its complexity and confusion. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I am going to tell you that if you have ever felt like your prayers are hitting the ceiling, if you have ever wondered whether God actually hears you in those quiet moments before the day begins, Teaching 10 is for you. Stay with me. And one more thing, I want to know where you are watching this from, because right now, in this exact moment, someone in a high-rise apartment in Lagos is watching this. Someone in a farmhouse in rural Brazil is watching this. Someone in a student dorm in South Korea. Someone on a lunch break in the United Kingdom. Someone who cannot sleep at 3 in the morning somewhere in the American South. All of you, simultaneously, in this astonishing way that only this strange and beautiful digital age makes possible, are gathered here. Drop your city or your country in the comments. It is not a small thing. Is a reminder that this longing to meet God before the world wakes up is not a private hunger. It is a global one. You are not alone in this room. Now, let us begin, because here is what the first teaching is going to reveal. Most of us have been approaching the morning prayer as if it is something we do for God, when in reality it is something God has been doing for us, long before we ever thought to reach for it. Teaching 1. There is a Hebrew word tucked inside Psalm 5:3 that most English translations soften into something almost unrecognizable. The psalm reads in most of our Bibles, "In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my requests before you and wait expectantly." It is a lovely verse. It reads like a gentle spiritual discipline, a description of someone who has their prayer life organized and their heart pointed in the right direction. But the word that sits underneath the phrase, "lay my requests before you," that word in Hebrew is arak. And arak does not mean to lay something down casually. It does not describe the kind of prayer where you run through a list in your head on your commute to work, or mutter a few words before your eyes are fully open. Arak is the word used in the Old Testament to describe the arrangement of the wood and the sacrifice on the altar before the fire comes. It means to set in order, to prepare, to arrange with intention and care, the way a priest prepares an offering. David, who wrote this psalm, was a man who had known what it was to be hunted. He had spent nights in caves, years in exile, seasons of deep personal shame and grief. And yet, in those morning prayers that he describes here, what he was doing was not simply running his worries past God before the day began. He was arranging them. He was laying them out before the Lord the way you would lay out the pieces of something precious, something that matters, something you are handling with both hands because you know its value. The morning was, for David, the hour of the altar, and the altar is not a place of careless deposit. It is a place of intentional surrender. Most of us have never thought about our morning prayers this way. We think about them as something to get through, or something to feel good about, or something to check off a list so we can say we did them. But what David is describing here is something more like a ceremony, not a religious ceremony full of empty ritual, but the living ceremony of a soul that knows it cannot carry the weight of what lies ahead without first bringing those weights to the one who was designed to bear them. When you arrange your prayers like an altar offering, you are doing something that reorders your entire interior world before a single external event of the day has had a chance to disorder it. Here is what this looks like in practice, and here is why it matters more than perhaps anything else I will say in this first teaching. When you wake in the morning, your soul is in its most porous state. The neuroscientists will tell you about the hypnopompic state, the threshold between sleep and waking, where the mind is still loose and open, still not fully armored against the world. The spiritual reality behind that neuroscience is something the Bible has always known. The morning is the hour when you are most available to be shaped. The question is not whether you will be shaped in the morning. The question is, what will do the shaping? If you reach for your phone first, the news and the notifications begin to shape you. If you lie in the residue of anxious dreams, the fears of the night begin to shape you. But if, in that porous, open, tender morning state, you bring yourself to the altar, if you arrack your prayers before God, arrange them, set them in order with intentionality, then it is the voice of God that gets access to the most open version of you. And what He speaks into that openness will carry you in ways that nothing else can. This is not about performance. This is not about waking up at 4 in the morning and logging 2 hours of intercession so that you feel spiritually superior by breakfast. Some of the most powerful altar moments I have ever heard described happened in 5 quiet minutes before a mother's children woke up, or in a whispered prayer in a parking lot before a difficult workday began. The length is not the point. The posture is the point. The arrangement is the point. The coming before God with your hands open and your soul saying, "Here I am," before the world gets its hands on me. That is the point. David waited expectantly. That phrase at the end of the verse is its own theology. He did not pray and then hold his breath in anxiety. He did not arrange his prayers and then immediately pick them back up and carry them away again. He set them before the Lord, and then he waited, with expectation, with the leaning forward posture of someone who actually believes that what they have placed on the altar will be received. Because here is the staggering truth about your morning prayer. It is never a monologue. You are not speaking into silence. You are speaking into the listening of a God who was already awake before you, who was already thinking about you before your eyes opened, who has already arranged His mercies, new, the Bible says, every single morning, long before you manage to arrange your words. The altar you build in the morning is met by a fire you did not light. And when that fire comes, it does not just consume the offering, it transforms it. There is something else in this psalm that I cannot let us pass by without acknowledging. The word expectantly, the posture of watching that David describes, comes from the Hebrew word tzapha, which means to lean forward and look, the way a watchman leans over the city wall, scanning the horizon for signs of what is coming. David was not passively waiting. He was actively watching. There is a difference between the waiting that sinks into the couch of spiritual passivity and the waiting that leans forward, with eyes trained on the place where God moves. When you arrange your prayers in the morning and then wait expectantly, you are taking the posture of the watchman, someone who has done what they are responsible for doing and is now leaning forward in the confidence that what they are watching for will come. This is not presumption. This is prayer. This is the rightly ordered soul that says, "I have brought what I can bring. Now I lean forward in expectation of what only you can bring." And here is the invitation I want to extend to you as we close this first teaching. I want you to think about one word, just one, that describes what you most need to place on the altar today. Not a list. One thing. The most pressing, most tender, most quietly urgent thing that is sitting in your chest as you watch this. Hold that word in your mind. And when this video ends, or even right now, in this moment, bring it before God with both hands, with the care of a priest who knows the value of what he is carrying. Set it in order, and then lean forward and watch. Because the fire that meets the morning altar has never once failed to come. I want to add one final thought about the arak, the arranging, because I think there is a dimension of it that we have not yet named, and that may be the most freeing thing I can offer you before we move into the rest of these teachings. In the Levitical system, the priest who arranged the offering on the altar was not doing something that earned God's favor. The altar was already God's idea. The fire was already God's provision. The priest's role in the Arak was not to manufacture something divine, but to participate in something divine that God had already initiated. He was not creating the encounter. He was showing up to the encounter that God had already prepared. And this, I want you to carry into every morning prayer you offer from this day forward. You are not manufacturing your access to God when you arrange your morning prayers before Him. You are showing up to an encounter that God arranged before you woke. The altar was His idea. The fire is His provision. The mercy was new before your eyes opened. And the Arak, your small, daily, sometimes clumsy act of arranging what you carry before the Lord of the morning, is the human participation in a divine initiative that was already underway. You are not the one who makes the morning holy. You are the one who is invited into the holiness the morning already is. Will you let this morning, not some future morning when you feel more prepared or more spiritually together, will you let this morning be the beginning of something new? Not a new discipline, a new meeting, a new encounter. The altar is already there. All that is left is for you to come to it. Teaching 2. Before we talk about the wilderness, we need to talk about the kind of tired that the wilderness produces. Because there is ordinary tired, and then there is the particular exhaustion that comes from doing something righteous and finding that it nearly destroyed you anyway. That is the kind of tired that meets us in 1 Kings 19, and it is the kind of tired that I suspect more than a few of you brought into this video with you this morning, or this afternoon, or this evening, whenever you found it. You did not arrive here because everything is fine. You arrived because something in you is looking for something that ordinary wakefulness cannot provide. Elijah had just come off one of the most spectacular spiritual victories in all of Scripture. He had stood alone on Mount Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal, called down fire from heaven, watched the rain break a 3-year drought, and actually ran ahead of the king's chariot in supernatural strength, and then a single threat from a single woman dismantled everything. Jezebel sent him a message saying that his life would be over within 24 hours, and Elijah ran. Not in spiritual power this time, in naked, terrified, depleted, I cannot take another step human fear. He ran into the wilderness, sat down under a juniper tree, and asked God to let him die. "It is enough," he said. "I am not better than my fathers." That word, enough, carries the weight of someone who has reached the absolute end of what they can give. Someone who has poured out everything they have, looked at the result, and decided that the pouring out was not worth the cost. Do you know that kind of tired? Not the tired that a good night's sleep fixes. The kind of tired that lives behind your eyes and in the space between your ribs. The tired that says, "I have been faithful and it has not been enough." The tired that says, "I have prayed and believed and tried, and I am still here, still stuck, still depleted, still running." That is the tiredness that meets us in Elijah's cry under the juniper tree. And if you have never felt it, you may not yet have been called to something that costs enough to produce it, but if you have felt it, if you are feeling some version of it right now, then what happens next in this passage is one of the most important things you will ever encounter in the Bible. God does not send a sermon. God does not send a theological argument for why Elijah should not feel the way he feels. God sends an angel who touches him and says, "Arise and eat." There is a cake baked on coals, and there is a cruse of water. And then the angel comes again. "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." Not because you are weak, not because you have failed, because the journey is too great for you. There is a profound mercy in that word because it does not locate the problem inside Elijah. It locates it in the journey. You are not broken. You are carrying something that is genuinely too heavy, and the God who sees that is not standing over you with a performance review. He is bending down and saying, "Eat, rest. The journey ahead requires more than your current strength. Let me replenish you before we continue." This is what the morning meeting with God is designed to do. Not to make you feel productive, not to fill a spiritual quota, but to replenish you before a journey that is genuinely too much for you to walk in your own strength. And the replenishment that God provides is always particular. It always meets you at the exact point of your depletion. For Elijah, it was physical, food and water and rest. Because the body and the soul are not separate compartments, and a God who cared only about spiritual things would not have led with a meal. But God is whole, and his replenishment is whole. And when you come to him in the morning with your particular depletion, whether it is emotional, spiritual, relational, physical, or that complicated tangle of all four that most real human exhaustion actually is, he meets you in the specificity of it. Then Elijah gets up and travels for 40 days and 40 nights on the strength of that meal. 40 days. On one encounter with the provision of God. I want you to sit with that arithmetic for a moment, because it says something extraordinary about what happens when God feeds you. It is not just enough for the morning. It is enough for the journey. When you meet God in those early hours, when you arrack your prayers before him, when you come to the altar with your depletion instead of hiding it, what he gives you does not last until 10 o'clock. It carries into the afternoon when the meeting runs long and the patience is thin. It carries into the evening when the children are difficult and the bills are still open on the counter. It carries into the night when the anxiety tries to return and you are too tired to fight it with your own strength. One morning meeting with God, received fully, can carry you further than you think you can go. And when Elijah reaches the mountain of God, the very mountain where Moses had stood, the mountain of encounter, he crawls into a cave and falls asleep again. And God asks him a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" It is not a rebuke. It is an invitation. It is the question that opens the space for Elijah to pour out everything that has been burning inside him. The isolation, the grief, the sense that he alone has been faithful and it has not been enough. God lets him pour it all out, and then he does something that changes everything. Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. A great wind comes, so powerful it breaks rocks. Then an earthquake, then a fire, all the things we associate with the dramatic arrival of God. But the text says, God was not in the wind. God was not in the earthquake. God was not in the fire. And then, after the fire, a still small voice. Or in the Hebrew, kol demama daka. A voice of thin silence, a sound so quiet it could only be heard by someone who was completely still, completely present, completely attuned. A sound that required Elijah to stop moving and stop performing and stop looking for God in the spectacular and simply listen. This is the invitation of the morning. Not to find God in the noise of the day, but to learn to hear his thin voice of silence before the noise begins. Because God has not stopped speaking in whispers. We have simply surrounded ourselves with so much volume that we have forgotten how to hear at that frequency. The morning before the world wakes up is the frequency adjustment. It is the tuning of the inner ear to the specific wavelength of the still small voice that has been speaking over your life all along. Even in the seasons when you were certain you could not hear anything at all. But I want to stay with Elijah a little longer, because there is something in his story that I think we move past too quickly in our rush to get to the miracle. Before the still small voice, God let him sleep. Twice in this passage, Elijah lies down and sleeps, and the angel of the Lord lets him rest before asking him to arise. We live in a culture that treats rest as a sign of weak faith, as if the truly faithful are the ones running hardest and sleeping least. But the God of Elijah is a God who touches a depleted prophet and says, before anything else, before the word and the wind and the earthquake and the fire, sleep. Let your body be held by the night while I work in the unseen places. Let the restoration begin in the chambers that only closed eyes can access. There is a form of spiritual arrogance in the refusal to rest, and most of us have practiced it at some point. We have told ourselves that the urgency of our mission does not allow for the luxury of sleep, or that our faithfulness is measured by how little we slow down. But Elijah's story tells a different story. It tells the story of a God who meets us under juniper trees, who sends angels with food and water before he sends us back into the work, who values the wholeness of his servant enough to insist on the meal before the movement. The morning is the cake on the coals. It is the provision that arrives in the night, so that when you rise and eat and look around, you find that the journey ahead, the one that looked impossible from under the tree, is something you can actually walk. And here is one more thing I need to tell you about the still, small voice, because it may be the most important practical word in this entire teaching. Elijah heard it only after he had come out of the cave. The text says that when the still, small voice came, Elijah wrapped his face in his mantle and went and stood at the entrance of the cave. He moved. He came to the threshold. He did not wait for the voice to come to him in the darkness of the inner chamber where he had been hiding. He came out to the entrance, where the light was, where the air was, where the mountain of God was waiting. And that is precisely the motion of the morning, that daily, deliberate, sometimes costly moving from the cave of sleep and night and unconsciousness toward the threshold of the new day, where the voice of thin silence is already waiting. The still, small voice does not shout through the cave walls. It waits at the entrance, and the morning is when you go to meet it there. I also want you to notice what God says to Elijah after the still, small voice. He does not say, "Go back and be stronger." He says, "Go, return on your way." The path continues. The mission is not cancelled. The calling is not revoked because Elijah reached the end of himself under the juniper tree. God simply sends him back on the way, replenished, recommissioned, with a companion named Elisha on the horizon, and a plan that Elijah could not have imagined from the bottom of his depletion. This is what the morning does. It does not promise that the road ahead will be free of difficulty. It promises that you will be sent back on it with something you did not have before. The specific, personal, direct replenishment of a God who bends down, touches the shoulder and says, "Arise and eat." The journey is too great for you to make alone, but I will make it with you, and the meal I have prepared for you here at the beginning will carry you further than you know. There is a detail in the Elijah story that is often overlooked because it sits so quietly between the dramatic moments. The angel of the Lord came back a second time. The first touch brought the food and the water, but Elijah ate and lay down again. And the angel came back. He did not come back to rebuke Elijah for going back to sleep. He did not come back to deliver a theological lecture about the importance of perseverance. He came back to touch Elijah again and to say again, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." God did not give up on Elijah between the first touch and the second. He simply came again. This is the pattern of the morning prayer across the life of the one who is learning to meet God at the threshold of the day. There are mornings when you come and receive and are carried. And there are mornings when you come and receive and are depleted again by what comes next. And you lie down again under the tree. And the same God who came the first time comes again. Not with a rebuke, not with an assessment of why you are still depleted. He comes again, and he touches you again, and he says the same thing he said before. Arise, eat. The journey is still too great. The provision is still here. Come again. The generosity of this pattern is almost more than I can fully express, because it undoes something that many of us have quietly believed about God, that He has a limited supply of patience for our returning, that eventually, the second or the third or the 50th time we come back depleted, He will be less inclined to stoop and touch and provide. But the God of Elijah is not a God whose generosity is worn thin by repetition. He is the God who comes back. He is the God who touches again. He is the God who sends the meal, not once for the journey, but as many times as the journey requires, because the journey itself is genuinely too great, and He knows it is too great, and His intention was never for you to make it on the single provision of your last good spiritual season. His intention is to be the God who keeps coming back, morning after morning, with the word, "Arise." The journey continues. Let me replenish you for the next portion of it. I also want to sit for a moment in what the juniper tree actually looked like, because I think we spiritualize it too quickly, and in doing so we miss something tender and specific. Elijah did not go to a prayer mountain. He did not retreat to a place that was aesthetically sacred or spiritually significant. He ran into the wilderness and sat down under a tree, any tree. The nearest tree, the tree that happened to be there when he could not go any further. The juniper tree in the wilderness was not a holy site. It was where his legs gave out. And that is precisely the place where God met him, not at the prayer mountain, not in the temple, under the tree where he collapsed. God does not require you to make it to a more sanctioned location before He comes to you. He comes to where your legs gave out. He comes to the floor of whatever room you are in when you cannot go any further. He comes with food and water and the word, "Arise." And He calls that place, the place where you gave out, the beginning of the next portion of the journey. The juniper tree is a holy place, not because it was beautiful or designated or prepared, because God showed up there. And God showing up is what makes a place holy. Your morning, whatever it looks like, wherever you are sitting, however thin the space feels, is a juniper tree that God has already found and is already on His way to meet you in. If something in this teaching is speaking to you, if you recognize the kind of tired that Elijah carried, or the kind of silence you have been longing for, I want you to share this video with one person in your life who you know is running on empty right now, not with a message attached, just the video. And maybe the words, "This one is for you." Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for the people we love is point them toward a source of replenishment we have found ourselves. You know someone who needs to hear about the cake on the coals. You know someone who needs to hear that the journey being too great is not an indictment of them, but an invitation from God. Send it to them today. Teaching 3. There is a difference between seeking the hand of God and seeking the face of God, and most of us spend the majority of our spiritual lives not knowing there is a difference at all. This is not a criticism, it is an observation about what we are trained to believe prayer is for. From our earliest experiences with faith, prayer is presented to us as the mechanism by which we ask God for things. Healing, provision, direction, breakthrough, protection for our children, resolution to our circumstances, and all of those are real and legitimate and right. The Bible is full of specific, bold, unapologetic asking. But somewhere in the architecture of our prayer lives, a subtle shift can happen. We begin to come to God primarily as the answer to our next question, rather than as the one we actually long to know. We seek His hand without ever learning to seek His face. Psalm 27 is where we find one of the most breathtaking moments of clarity about this distinction. David writes, "One thing I have desired of the Lord, that I will seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in His temple." One thing, not a list, not an inventory of needs and requests. One thing, And the one thing is not a problem solved, it is a presence enjoyed. It is the beauty of the Lord beheld. It is the face of God sought. And what makes this remarkable is the context in which David writes it. The very next verse describes enemies encamped against him, adversaries risen against him, a battle that surrounds him on every side. He is not writing this from a place of circumstances resolved. He is writing it from a place of circumstances dire and choosing, in the middle of all of that, to name the face of God as the one thing that matters more than any of it. This is what it means to seek God's face before you seek His hand. It does not mean pretending you do not need what you need. It does not mean bypassing the real and pressing requests that are burning in your chest when you wake up in the morning, the medical test you are waiting on, the relationship that has been fracturing, the financial pressure that makes it hard to breathe. Those things are real. God wants to hear about them. But David's theology says that there is a sequence that changes everything. When you first come to God for His face, when you come to simply be in His presence, to behold Him, to let the beauty of who He is be the first thing that fills your field of spiritual vision, something happens to the requests that follow. They come from a different place. They are offered from a posture of trust rather than a posture of anxiety. They are prayers of a person who has already been with the person, rather than prayers of a person who is desperately trying to get a hearing from a God they feel uncertain about. Think about the difference in your own relationships. When you reach out to someone you love, not because you need something from them, but simply because you want to be in their presence. When you call just to hear their voice. When you show up at the door just to sit in the same room. There is a quality to that relationship that is fundamentally different from a relationship built almost entirely on what one person needs from the other. Most of us know what the second kind of relationship feels like from the receiving end, and it is exhausting. But there is a third party in this conversation, and it is the version of your own prayer life that has been shaped more by need than by desire. What would it mean to shift that? What would it mean to begin your morning not by bringing your list, but by simply bringing yourself, by coming to the house of the Lord, even in the small and unglamorous house of a quiet corner of your apartment or your car or your kitchen, simply to behold, simply to be present to the presence that is always present to you. David goes on to say something that I cannot move past without stopping. When you said, "Seek my face," my heart said to you, "Your face, Lord, I will seek." The invitation came first from God. The longing in David's heart to seek God's face was not something David manufactured through spiritual discipline. It was a response to an invitation that God had already extended. God is the one who said, "Seek my face," and the human heart, when it is tuned to that frequency, can hear that invitation and respond. This is the hidden source of every genuine desire for morning prayer that you have ever felt. It is not self-discipline. It is not guilt. It is not religious obligation. It is God whispering into your spirit, "Seek my face," and your soul, which was made for exactly this, saying, "Your face, Lord, I will seek." In the morning before the world wakes up, the invitation is still there. It is always there. Seek my face. And the morning is the hour when we are most able to hear it clearly, before the 10,000 other voices begin their competing invitations, the voice of the inbox and the calendar, the voice of the news and the market, the voice of the worry that has learned our name. All of those voices are loud, and they are all going to speak today. But here, in this thin, holy window of the early morning, there is another voice, quieter and more permanent than any of them, saying the same thing it has always been saying. Come, seek, behold. Let my face be the first light your soul encounters today. Let me be the one who shapes your eyes before you open them on the world. Let the beauty of the Lord be the frame through which you see everything else that follows. And then David says, "For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle he shall hide me." Here is the provision that comes from seeking the face, not the absence of trouble, but a hiding place inside it. The pavilion is not a place above the storm. It is a place within the storm where the storm cannot reach you in the way it reaches those who are exposed. When you have been with God, truly been with Him, not just near Him, you carry a kind of interior stability that external circumstances cannot demolish. It is not that the trouble goes away. David's enemies are still in the verse. But the one who has sought the face of God is hidden in a way that cannot be explained by the usual categories of human resilience. They are hidden by the one they have sought. The face you behold becomes the shelter you find. There is something else in Psalm 27 that does not always get the attention it deserves, and it sits in verse 13 like a quiet miracle. David writes, "I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." I would have lost heart. The admission is startling, not because a man of faith should never be close to losing heart, but because David is honest enough to say he was. He does not present the seeking of God's face as something that makes you immune to the near collapse of courage. He presents it as the thing that held him back from the edge. I would have lost heart unless I had believed. The seeking is not a prevention of the near fall. It is the thing that keeps the near fall from becoming the actual fall. This is the honest testimony of someone who has genuinely sought the face of God in the middle of enemies and fears and the very real possibility of losing everything. And the testimony is not that the seeking made everything easy. The testimony is that it made the hard things survivable. That in the season when the heart was closest to losing itself, the face of God was the thing that held it together. And the land of the living, that phrase, is remarkable because it insists that the goodness of the Lord is not reserved for heaven. It is for here, for this broken, beautiful, complicated, difficult life that you are living right now. The goodness of God is not postponed to a future existence. It is visible in this one for those who have learned where to look, and looking begins in the morning. The verse that follows this confession is one of the most quietly powerful lines in all of the Psalms. Wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and He shall strengthen your heart. Wait, not because nothing is happening. Wait because what is happening cannot yet be fully seen. Be of good courage, and notice that this courage is not the absence of fear. David has just confessed that he was close to losing heart. This is courage spoken from inside the fear, not from a safe distance above it. Good courage is the courage that names what it is afraid of, and then chooses to wait on the Lord anyway. It is the courage of the morning prayer offered on the days when everything in you is saying, "This is not working. I cannot go on, it is enough." It is the courage that lifts itself one more time to the altar, and the promise attached to that courage is direct and personal. He shall strengthen your heart. Not circumstances, not the elimination of what is hard. The heart itself, strengthened by the one you chose to wait for. I want to dwell on that word heart for a moment. Because in the Hebrew imagination, the heart, lev, is not primarily the seat of emotion, the way we tend to use it in modern culture. The heart in the Hebrew Bible is the center of the will, the place where decisions are made and commitments are formed, and the direction of a life is ultimately determined. When David says, "He shall strengthen your heart," he is not primarily promising that you will feel better, though you may. He is promising that the central governing faculty of your interior life, the place from which everything flows, will be made stronger by the act of waiting. The strengthened heart is a heart whose capacity to choose, to commit, to hold fast, to return to the altar one more morning after another, has been increased by the encounter with God. You will not simply feel more hopeful. You will be more capable of hope because the faculty of hoping has been exercised and expanded by the faithful practice of seeking the face of God before you sought anything else. And there is something I want to say about what the house of the Lord looks like in the ordinary life of the person watching this video, because I think the word house can feel exclusionary in a way that David did not intend it. For David, the house of the Lord was a specific location, the tabernacle, the place where the Ark of the Covenant rested, the geographic center of Israel's encounter with the presence of God. But the New Testament has relocated the house of the Lord. It is no longer a building in a city you have to travel to. The presence of God now dwells in the person of the Spirit, who lives in those who have received him, which means that the house of the Lord that David longed to dwell in is already within you. Every morning you come to pray is a morning you are already in the right location. The address has not changed. You have simply been given a key you did not have before. And the one thing David desired, to behold the beauty of the Lord, is available to you not in a temple in Jerusalem, but in the quiet of whatever ordinary room you find yourself in at the beginning of another day. I have one thing I want to ask you to do before this teaching ends. Not a comment this time, not a share. I want to ask you to make a decision, right now in the privacy of your own heart, about what tomorrow morning will look like. Not a big, complicated 2-hour program, just this, that before you reach for anything else, before the phone, before the news, before the inbox, you will say these 5 words. Your face, Lord, I will seek. 5 words, a second and a half. And then let the silence that follows be the space where the face you were made to seek begins to come into view. Teaching 4, there is a waiting that weakens and a waiting that strengthens. And the difference between them is almost entirely a matter of what you believe about the one you are waiting for. Most of us have done both kinds. We know the waiting that feels like standing in a corridor with no door, the waiting of uncertainty, the waiting of abandonment, the waiting that begins to erode your sense of whether you ever really believed at all. And then, if we have been in the company of God long enough, we have also known the other kind, the waiting that feels less like passivity and more like gathering, less like stasis and more like the coiling of something that is about to release. Isaiah 40:31 describes this second kind of waiting, and it does so with a word that will not let me go. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. In the Hebrew, the word translated wait is kava, and kava does not mean to sit and endure. Kava is the word for the twisting together of threads, the way a rope is made. Each individual thread is weak, easily broken, but when you twist those threads together, you create something of a fundamentally different tensile strength. You create something that can hold weight that the individual strands never could. When Isaiah uses this word for waiting on God, he is describing a process of being twisted together with the strength of the Lord, not waiting until God arrives to help, but waiting in a way that intertwines your weakness with his power, your diminishing with his inexhaustible resource, your single thread with the infinite strength of the one you are waiting on. This is why the morning matters so profoundly. The morning is the hour of kava. It is the hour when, if you will come to God with your single fraying thread of capacity, your inadequate energy for the day, your insufficient patience for the relationships that will demand it, your thin reserves of faith for the circumstances that will test it, and twist that thread around him, something new is formed. Not you managing better, not you accessing a religious version of positive thinking, a genuinely new kind of strength, formed at the junction of your emptiness and his fullness. The waiting is the twisting is the morning. Isaiah goes on to describe what this looks like. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Notice the order. It begins with soaring, the high, wide, effortless altitude of the eagle riding the thermal. But then it descends to running and then to walking. Most of us assume the progression should go the other direction. First we walk, then we run, then we soar. But Isaiah reverses it, and I think on purpose. Because the promise of Kava is not that you will always feel the soaring. The promise is that even when the season has you in its most ordinary, most plodding, most unglamorous phase, the walking phase, the just keep putting one foot in front of the other phase, you will not faint. The person who has twisted themselves around the Lord in the morning can walk into Wednesday afternoon without fainting. Not because Wednesday afternoon is easy, because the twist has already happened, the strength is already formed, the rope is already made. There is a particular tenderness in the phrase, "they shall walk and not faint," that I want you to receive before we move on. Because most of us in this season are not soaring. Some of us are not even running. Some of us are walking and we are not entirely sure we are doing that well. Some of us got out of bed this morning and that was the greatest act of faith we could manage. And Isaiah's word to the one who waits on God, who twists themselves around him in the morning, who comes to the altar with the single thread of what is left and gives it over, is not, "You will feel like you are soaring." It is this, "You will not faint. You will not fall down. You will not be overcome by what is coming at you today, because you are not walking in your own strength alone. You are walking in the twisted together strength of someone who never grows weary, whose understanding is unsearchable, who gives power to the faint and increases strength to those who have none. He gives power to the faint, not to the strong who are asking for more power. To the faint, to the ones whose voice is shaking, to the ones whose prayer this morning might have been nothing more than, "God, I cannot," because cannot is the beginning of Kava. It is the moment the single thread says, "I need to be twisted around something stronger than I am." And God, who never grows faint, who never grows weary, who never reaches the end of his resource or his patience or his strength, takes that cannot and begins to twist. I want to linger in Isaiah 40 for a moment longer, because the prophet does not just give us the promise of Kava in isolation. He gives us the portrait of the God who makes it possible, and that portrait is what makes the promise livable rather than merely theoretical. Have you not known? Have you not heard? Isaiah asks, as if challenging us for our amnesia. The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable. This is not a description of a God who sometimes gets tired, who has difficult seasons of his own that make him less available to us. This is the declaration of a God whose capacity is ontological, built into the very nature of his being, not contingent on any external condition. He does not faint. He does not grow weary. And his understanding, the depth of his knowledge of your situation, your history, your needs, your name, is without any searchable bottom. What this means practically is something enormous. When you come to the morning altar with your single thread of capacity, you are not bringing it to a God who is doing his best to help you while managing his own limitations. You are bringing it to the Creator of the ends of the earth, who has never once reached the end of his resource, who does not have a tired Tuesday, who does not find your situation more complicated than he can handle. You are bringing your thread to the one whose understanding of you is deeper than your understanding of yourself, and who has been holding you in that unsearchable knowledge since before you were born. Kava is not a desperate grasp at a distant resource. It is the natural response of a thread that knows what it is twisting itself around. And here is what I want you to consider as we move toward the end of this teaching. The eagle does not manufacture the thermal on which it soars. The eagle simply knows how to find it and trusts it when it rises beneath the spread of its wings. The morning prayer is the spreading of wings toward the thermal of God's strength, not the manufacture of strength you do not have, but the positioning of yourself in the place where His strength can carry you. You do not generate cover, you practice it. You come to the morning consistently enough and with enough open-handedness that the twisting begins to happen not just in the quiet moments, but in the ordinary moments of the day. In the meeting, in the conversation, in the moment when the patience should have run out and somehow did not, in the evening when something should have broken you and held instead. The rope has been forming. You may not have seen it, but it is there. Something I want to say plainly before we leave this teaching. The language of Isaiah 40 is addressed to people who are exhausted by injustice, not just by their own private struggles. The original hearers of these words were a people in exile, people who had watched everything they loved dismantled by forces beyond their control, who had been carried away from their homes and their inheritance and their sense of who they were in God's eyes. When Isaiah says to them, "Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength," he is not speaking primarily to a people managing their personal spiritual development. He is speaking to a people who have been publicly, structurally, communally depleted. And the promise he extends is not just personal renewal. It is the kind of renewal that restores a people to their purpose, that puts them back on their feet for the mission that exile tried to end. If you are exhausted not just by personal difficulty but by something larger, a system, a loss, a long dismantling of something you built and believed in, the word of Kava is still for you, especially for you. The waiting is not weakness. It is the specific spiritual posture that allows the renewal to take root at the depth of the need rather than at the surface. I also want to say something about the mechanics of how Kava works across time, because there is a temptation to think of this as a single event transaction. You come to the morning once, you twist the thread once, you receive the strength and you are done. But the image of rope making is inherently cumulative. You do not make a rope in a single gesture. You make it by the repeated, consistent daily act of twisting. Each morning you come, the twist goes deeper. Each morning the thread wraps around the source. The bond becomes stronger. The rope becomes longer and more capable of bearing weight. The person who has been practicing Kava for 10 years is not just someone who has had 10 years of good mornings. They are someone whose interior structure has been fundamentally reshaped by the cumulative weight of 10 years of twisting. Their capacity to bear difficulty, to remain rooted under pressure, to not faint in the walking seasons, that capacity is not natural to them. It was formed in them gradually over the faithful and ordinary and sometimes unglamorous practice of bringing their thread to God before the world began its demands. This means that the morning prayer you offer today, even if it feels thin and brief and uncertain, is not wasted. It is not undone by the imperfection of your attention or the distractedness of your heart or the fact that you fell asleep mid-sentence in the middle of it. Every thread counts. Every morning of showing up adds to the rope, and the person you are becoming, the one who does not faint in the hardest seasons, the one whose heart has been strengthened by 10,000 mornings of choosing the face of God before anything else. That person is being formed right now in the thread you are adding today. You cannot see the rope yet, but it is forming. It has been forming all along. I want to pause here and invite you to declare something. In the comments or out loud right now, wherever you are, I want you to say, "I am not waiting in vain." You may not feel it yet. The circumstances may not have shifted, but the Hebrew tells you what waiting on God actually is, and it is not passivity, and it is not unanswered delay. It is the process of being made into something stronger than you were before. Declare it. I am not waiting in vain. Teaching 5. There is a prayer that the Bible describes as so extraordinary, so cosmic in its significance. that it caused a literal delay in the heavenly realm, a 21-day interruption between the prayer being offered and the answer arriving. And the reason I need to tell you about Daniel 10 is not because I want to give you a theology of spiritual warfare, though there is one here. It is because I want to address the question that almost every person who has been praying faithfully has asked at some point, usually in a whisper and usually in the dark. Why is there such a gap between the prayer and the answer? Daniel was in his 70s when the events of chapter 10 occur. He had been faithful to God through the entire arc of his extraordinary life. The captivity, the lion's den, the rise and fall of empires, the visions and the dreams and the interpretations that had made him indispensable to rulers who did not share his faith. And in his old age, he receives a vision that troubles him deeply enough that he enters a period of mourning and prayer and fasting for 3 full weeks. 3 weeks of seeking God with no visible response. 3 weeks of morning prayers offered into what must have felt on the worst days like something very close to silence. And then on the 21st day, an angel appears and says something that changes everything about how we understand the geography between prayer and answer. From the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. From the first day, the prayer was heard the moment it was offered. The answer was dispatched from the throne of heaven immediately. But between the sending and the arriving, there was resistance, a spiritual battle in a heavenly realm that Daniel could not see, involving forces of opposition whose names and nature the text does not fully explain, but whose capacity to delay the delivery of God's answer was apparently real. And then the angel tells Daniel something else. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. The breakthrough came not because Daniel prayed harder on the 21st day. The breakthrough came because Daniel kept praying through every day in between. The faithfulness of the morning prayer is not just a spiritual discipline for your own soul. It is the persistence that holds open the channel through which God's answers arrive. Every morning you came back to the altar during the 21 days, you were participating in something you could not see. Your faithful kava was part of the structure that allowed the answer to keep moving through opposition toward you. The gap between your prayer and its fulfillment is not evidence of God's absence or indifference. It is evidence of a battle being fought in a realm you cannot see, by forces deployed on your behalf. Because the prayer you prayed from your specific morning corner of the world was heard from the first day you prayed it. I want you to receive this carefully, because I know the temptation that meets people who have been praying about something for a long time. Not 21 days, but years. I know the exhaustion of faithful morning prayers that have not yet produced a visible answer. I know the creeping question of whether the prayer is even reaching anyone at all. And the answer of Daniel 10 to that question is a resounding yes. Not as theological abstraction, but as the lived experience of a man who kept coming back to the morning altar every day for 3 weeks without a single sign that anything was moving, who found out at the end of those 3 weeks that everything had been moving from the very first day. Your 21st day is coming. I do not know when it is. The text does not give us a formula for calculating it, but I know what it is not. It is not the day you stop. The people who receive the answer are the people who are still at the altar when it arrives. And the altar is the morning. And the morning is where you have been faithfully, even on the days when nothing felt like it was happening, because everything was happening. You just could not yet see it. There is something called gap standing, and Daniel was doing it without knowing that was what it was called. He stood in the gap between heaven's intention and earth's current reality, and he held that space open with his fasting and his prayer and his humbling of himself before God. He would not let the gap close. He would not concede the territory. He kept showing up, and his showing up his faithful, ordinary, 3-week-long habit of coming back to seek God's face was the human participation in a divine breakthrough that his prayers had initiated and his faithfulness sustained. But I want to tell you something about Daniel that the text makes clear in a way we can easily overlook. He did not begin this season of prayer with any guarantee that his prayer would be answered. He began it with grief. The text says he was mourning for 3 full weeks. He was not entering this season from a place of spiritual confidence and strategic intercession. He was entering it from a place of burden so heavy that he had to stop eating and stop anointing himself and stop engaging in the ordinary comforts of life. The prayer that moved heaven was not offered from a place of strength. It was offered from a place of breaking. And God, who is close to the broken-hearted, dispatched the angel not despite Daniel's brokenness, but through it. Because the prayer that carries the most weight in the throne room of heaven is often the prayer that has been wrung out of a soul that has nothing left to offer but the truest version of itself. I also want to notice what Daniel's faithful mourning practice had built in him across the decades. This was not the first time Daniel had faced a prolonged season of waiting. He had lived most of his adult life as a captive in a foreign land. A land that worshipped other gods, that spoke another language, that tried on multiple occasions to make him into something other than what he was. And in every single one of those seasons, the text shows us Daniel returning to his window, facing Jerusalem 3 times a day to pray. 3 times a day. Not when circumstances were favorable. Not when the lion's den was not a threat. Every day, 3 times, facing the direction of the city of God, praying toward the presence of a God who felt, from a Babylonian exile, very far away. That rhythm, that faithful, regular, regardless of circumstances rhythm, was what formed the soul that could sustain 21 days of unanswered prayer without giving up. The morning does not just help you today. It is building the interior architecture that will carry you through the 21-day seasons that have not yet arrived. This matters for you right now, in this particular morning. Because if you came to this video from a place of spiritual confidence and abundant faith, then Daniel 10 confirms what you already believe, that God hears and heaven moves. But if you came from a place of mourning, from a place of 3-week-long fasting that feels like giving up the thing you needed most just to stay close to God, from a place of not knowing if any of this is reaching anywhere, then Daniel 10 is for you in a different and deeper way. It is the testimony that the prayer offered from the place of breaking is not a weaker prayer. It is often the very prayer that sends the angel. You are a gap stander. Whatever you have been praying about, whatever you have been bringing to the morning altar with a persistence that has sometimes felt foolish, you are a gap stander, and the armies of heaven have been deployed because of what you have been doing in that quiet place before the world wakes up. I want to give you one more word from Daniel 10 before we leave it, because there is a sentence the angel speaks that I have found to be one of the most comfort-laden sentences in all of Scripture for the person who is waiting in the gap. After explaining the battle and the delay and the 21 days, after telling Daniel that Michael had come to help, the angel says to him, "O Daniel, man greatly beloved." In the midst of the explanation of the battle and the hardship and the gap and the opposition, God pauses, through the voice of the angel, to tell Daniel who he is, not what he did, not how faithfully he prayed, who he is, greatly beloved. And this naming, this tender, specific, unprompted declaration of identity comes to Daniel before a single thing in his circumstances has changed. The battle is still ongoing, the opposition is still in the field, the answer has only just arrived after 3 weeks, and God takes the moment to say, I know who you are greatly beloved, before the blessing, before the breakthrough, before the resolution. the belovedness, because the belovedness is the foundation on which everything else is built. You do not become beloved by praying faithfully for 21 days. You pray faithfully for 21 days because you are beloved, and the beloved keep returning to the presence of the one who loves them, even when the returning feels like it is going nowhere, even when the gap is still open and the answer has not yet arrived. You are greatly beloved, and the morning is the place where you come to remember that. One more day. Teaching 6. There is a moment in Mark 10 that almost gets lost in the noise of the miracle that surrounds it. But once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because it says something so specific and so tender about the posture of a soul that is coming to Jesus that it becomes a kind of permanent image inside you, a picture of what it actually looks like when desperation becomes faith and faith becomes encounter. The moment is this. Bartimaeus, hearing that Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, begins to cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The crowd tells him to be quiet. He cries out more. Jesus stops. Jesus asks that he be called. And the crowd says, "Be of good cheer, rise, he is calling you." And then, this is the moment. And he, casting away his garment, rose and came to Jesus. He threw away his cloak. The text would not include that detail if it were not significant. In that culture, the outer cloak was one of the most important possessions a blind beggar could have. It served as his collection point, the garment he spread on the ground to catch the coins that passers-by might drop. It was his livelihood. It was his shelter. It was the thing that identified him in the marketplace of human need. And when he heard that Jesus was calling for him, he threw it away. He did not carefully fold it and set it aside. He cast it away. The Greek word means to throw off, to fling away, as if he already knew that where he was going, he would not need it anymore, as if he was so certain of the encounter ahead that he was willing to release the thing that had kept him surviving in the life he was about to leave behind. This is one of the most extraordinary acts of faith in the entire gospel record, and it happens before Bartimaeus has received anything from Jesus. He has only heard that Jesus is calling for him, and that is enough. That is enough to make him throw away the garment. The calling of Jesus is enough to make the survival mechanism of the old life unnecessary. He runs to Jesus, and Jesus asks him the question that Jesus always asks, the question that refuses to assume what we need even when it is obvious. "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus says, "Rabboni, that I may receive my sight." And Jesus says, "Go your way. Your faith has made you well." And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. When you come to God in the morning, when you come before the world is awake, with your particular blindness, your particular lack of sight about what this day holds and what your life is becoming, and whether the things you are trusting God for are really going to arrive, I want you to think about what garment you are still holding on to, because most of us come to the morning prayer still carrying our survival mechanisms. We pray, but we hold on to the backup plan. We seek God's face, but we keep the old cloak spread out, just in case the coins keep coming. We cry out for mercy, but we stay seated in the spot where we have always sat, not quite willing to fling ourselves toward the voice that is calling us. And there is grace in that. God is not standing over us with a checklist of garments we need to have thrown off before our prayer is valid, but there is something that becomes available to the one who throws the cloak. An encounter of a different depth, a healing of a different quality, a following of a different commitment. The cloak that Bartimaeus threw away was not a bad thing. It was a necessary thing for the life he had been living. But Jesus was calling him into a different life, and the cloak belonged to the old one. Some of what we carry into our morning prayers belongs to the old life too. The carefully managed distance from God that keeps us safe from disappointment. The theological armor that protects us from hoping too much. the habit of asking for things without ever quite expecting to receive them. These are not sins. They are survival mechanisms, grown up around a soul that has been waiting a long time and has been hurt by waiting. But when Jesus calls, the cloak can go, the mechanism can be laid down, and the running, the ungainly, desperate, certain running of Bartimaeus toward the one who called him and can begin. I want to stay with the detail that Bartimaeus was blind for a moment more, because his blindness is not incidental to the story. It is the story. He could not see Jesus. He could only hear that Jesus was near, and his faith, the faith that Jesus later names as the thing that made him well, was built entirely on the report of others, on the sound of a crowd moving toward him, on the name spoken in the air, Jesus of Nazareth. He could not see the face he was running toward. He could only move in the direction of the voice. And this, I believe, is the experience of the morning prayer for more of us than we are comfortable admitting. We cannot always see the face. We cannot always feel the presence. There are mornings, many of them for most of us, when we come to the altar, and what we encounter is not a felt sense of God's nearness, but something more like the report of others who have been here before us and have told us, He is near. He stops when he hears his name called. He asks what you need, and we move, like Bartimaeus, toward the voice of a testimony we have received but cannot yet verify with our own two open eyes. And the miracle of this story is not just that Bartimaeus received his sight. It is that his faith was counted as faith before he could see. The throwing of the cloak was faith. The rising and running was faith. The crying out louder when the crowd told him to be quiet. That was faith. Every act of reaching toward Jesus before any confirming evidence had arrived was the faith that Jesus later named as the source of the healing. Your morning prayer, offered on the days when you cannot feel anything, when the altar seems cold, when the silence seems absolute, is the cloak throwing, the rising, the running. It is faith doing its work in the dark before the sight arrives. And the sight, when it comes, will reveal that everything you did in the dark counted. There is one more detail I want to give you before we leave Bartimaeus. The text says that after he received his sight, he followed Jesus on the road. Not that he returned to his corner of the marketplace cured and grateful, to live the life he had always imagined he would live, if only he could see. He followed Jesus on the road, the same road Jesus was walking toward Jerusalem, toward the cross, toward the hardest and most important thing that had ever been done in human history. He threw the old cloak down and picked up a different way of living entirely. The healing was not the ending. It was the beginning of a following. And this is what morning prayer, received as encounter rather than duty, tends to do in a life over time. It does not merely improve you. It begins to reorient you. It shifts the direction of your walking. You begin to find that you are on a different road than the one you were on before, not because you engineered the change, but because you kept running toward the one who called you, and the one who called you kept walking, and you kept following. And somewhere along the way, the road became a different road entirely. I want to say something about the cry that started everything for Bartimaeus, because in it there is a model for the morning prayer that I think is more honest and more powerful than much of what we have been taught prayer looks like. He did not pray an organized, well-structured, theologically sophisticated prayer. He cried out. He used 8 words, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And when the crowd tried to silence him, he did not tone it down or try to make his petition more palatable. He cried out more. There was nothing refined or controlled about the prayer of Bartimaeus. It was the raw, undisguised, unapologetic cry of someone who knew that his one chance was passing by and who refused to let protocol or social pressure or the opinions of the crowd stand between his need and the one who could meet it. And Jesus stopped. In all the noise and movement of that crowded road, the cry of one man who had nothing but his need and his voice, that cry stopped the Son of God in his tracks. Your morning cry does not need to be sophisticated to stop God. It does not need to use the right theological vocabulary or follow an approved format or begin with the correct liturgical phrases. It needs only to be the genuine cry of your actual heart, the unpolished, unperformed, unfiltered cry of the thing you actually need, directed at the one who actually has the power to meet it. And here is the stunning truth of the Bartimaeus story. Jesus was already heading somewhere else when the cry stopped him. He was on his way to Jerusalem. He had things to do, a week to prepare for, the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he stopped for one blind beggar who refused to be quiet. The cry of the genuinely needy directed at Jesus is always powerful enough to stop him. Your morning voice, however thin, however cracked, however uncertain it sounds to your own ears, is exactly that kind of cry, and he is still stopping. What is the cloak you need to throw before this teaching ends? I'm not going to tell you what it is. You already know. You have known for longer than you would like to admit. And I want to invite you to do something that might feel unusual. I want you to write it in the comments, not in detail, just one word or two that names the thing you are releasing. The survival mechanism, the managed distance, the careful armor, as an act of faith, as a declaration that you have heard Jesus calling and you are running toward him, and you are not looking back at what you left on the ground. You do not have to explain it to anyone. Just write it, and let the writing be the throwing. Teaching 7. Gratitude is often presented to us as a spiritual practice, something we cultivate, something we discipline ourselves into, something we add to the morning routine alongside prayer and scripture, reading like a vitamin we have been told is good for us. And there is nothing wrong with that presentation exactly, but it misses something essential about what gratitude actually is in the economy of God. It misses the fact that gratitude is not primarily a discipline, it is a revelation. It is the moment your eyes open to what has always been true. And there is no better illustration of this distinction than the story in Luke 17, the 10 lepers and the one who came back. They were all healed, all 10 of them standing at the edge of the road, crying out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us," and Jesus sending them to show themselves to the priests, which was the Jewish protocol for certifying that a person with leprosy had been cured. And as they went, they were cleansed, all 10. The healing was not withheld from the 9 who did not return. The miracle was complete, fully given, covering all of them equally. But only one turned back. Luke tells us he was a Samaritan, a detail that matters because it means he was the one with the greatest cultural distance from the religious establishment, the one with the least social expectation of being included in any Jewish miracle at all. And he fell on his face at the feet of Jesus and gave him thanks. And Jesus says, and this is where the passage breaks open, were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give glory to God except this foreigner? And then he says to the one who returned, "Arise, go your way, your faith has made you well." The 9 were healed, but the one who returned was made well. The Greek word Jesus uses for made well with the returning leper is sozo, the same word used for salvation. It is wholeness at a depth that transcends the physical healing, a wellness that goes all the way down into the soul, a restoration that is more complete than any single miracle could accomplish on its own. The 9 received the gift and missed the giver. The one received the giver and found that the gift, which had already been extraordinary, was only the beginning of what was available to those who turned back in gratitude and fell at his feet. This is what happens in the morning when we bring thanksgiving to God, not just for the things that went well, but for the fact of his presence, for the fact that his mercies are new, for the fact that we woke up at all, which is its own miracle that we have named ordinary because it happens every day. When we turn back, when we come back before the day begins, When we fall at his feet in gratitude, not because we have been told it is a spiritual discipline, but because something in us has genuinely been awakened to what has been given, we move from healed to whole. We move from the recipient of a gift to the company of the giver. And the giver is inexhaustible in a way the gift alone can never be. There is something I have noticed about people who have a deep, unshakable morning practice of gratitude, not a gratitude list of 5 things they are trying to feel good about, but a genuine, poured-out thankfulness that has its roots in a real encounter with God's goodness. Those people carry something into the rest of their day that is genuinely different from what other people carry, not an absence of difficulty. Their circumstances are often as hard as anyone else's, but an orientation, a facing toward. The 9 lepers continued in the direction they were already going, toward the priests and the certification and the reintegration into normal life. But the one turned back, and the turning back changed the direction of everything. When you turn toward God in the morning, when you face toward Him with your gratitude, your praise, your acknowledgement that He is good and that His mercies are real, you are setting the direction of your soul for the day. You are oriented differently than you would have been, and orientation is everything. I want to spend a moment with the 9 because I think they deserve more than a passing rebuke in most of the sermons we hear about this passage. The 9 were not wicked people. They were people who had received an answer to the most desperate prayer of their lives and were now, understandably, running toward the next step. The priestly certification that would allow them back into society, back into the arms of their families, back into the life that leprosy had taken from them. They were running toward re-entry, and their running made complete human sense. The miracle had set in motion a whole chain of urgent necessities, and they were attending to those necessities with the focus of people who had been waiting for this moment for years. Their failure to return was not a failure of character. It was a failure of attention, the specific kind of spiritual inattention that most of us practice most of the time, which is the inability to stop in the middle of the good things God has done and let the goodness of it actually land. We receive and we move. We are blessed and we hurry on to manage the blessing. We are healed, and we immediately begin the work of administrating the healing. And somewhere in that hurrying, the face of the giver slips out of view, and we find ourselves in the company of the 9 without ever having intended to be. The morning is the daily intervention against that inattention. It is the practice of turning back before the day starts moving so fast that turning back becomes impossible. It is the choice, made in the thin, quiet, unhurried air of the early hours, to be the one who returns, not the 9 who ran ahead. And what you receive in the returning is not a reward for your superior spiritual discipline. It is the sozo that was always waiting for the one who came back, the wholeness that goes deeper than healing, the restoration that goes further than any single act of provision could take you. The presence of the giver, which is itself the gift that makes all other gifts complete. There is also something profoundly countercultural about the Samaritan in this story that I do not want us to miss. He was the one who had the least religious infrastructure, supporting his ability to go directly to the priests. He was the most outside the system. He was the one for whom all the usual channels of gratitude expression, the temple, the priesthood, the religious community, were less available. And yet he is the one who found his way back to Jesus. Because genuine gratitude does not need infrastructure. It does not need a program or a designated time slot or a formal religious category. It needs only the recognition that something extraordinary has been given and that the giver is right there, still within reach, still present on the road. The Samaritan turned around in the middle of an ordinary journey and fell on his face on the ground and said, "Thank you." That is the whole action. That is the full liturgy. And it was enough to receive the sozo. Your morning practice of gratitude does not need to be elaborate or extended or performed according to any particular method. It needs only to be real. A genuine turning back, a genuine recognition, a genuine falling at the feet of the one whose goodness has been and continues to be the source of everything good in your life. There is something else I want to say about Jesus' question in Luke 17, because it is easy to read it as a rebuke, a disappointed, "Where are the other 9?" that shames the absent ones and holds them up as a cautionary example. But I do not think that is primarily what Jesus is doing here. I think he is doing something far more tender than a rebuke. I think he is expressing something like grief, not the grief of an offended authority figure, but the grief of a giver whose generosity has been received without being returned to. The gifts went out, all 10 of them, complete and full. 9 of them arrived and were used, and the giver stood in the road watching them go, and something in him longed for the return. Not because he needed the praise, not because he was keeping score, but because he knew what was available for the one who came back. He knew about the sozo. He knew about the wholeness that was waiting in the returning, and he watched 9 people choose the gift over the giver and walk away from the deeper thing that was still available to them. "Where are the 9?" is not primarily an accusation. It is a lament. It is the cry of love, watching beloved ones walk away from more than they knew was there. And this reframes the morning prayer of gratitude in a way that I find enormously freeing. We are not returning to God in the morning to maintain our standing with him, or to fulfill an obligation that keeps the blessings flowing, or to demonstrate the quality of our faith by our consistency of thankfulness. We are returning because there is more available in the returning than in the ongoing receiving. God is not standing in the road counting the gratitude of the 9 who did not come back and deciding whether to send more blessings next time. He is standing in the road knowing that the one who returns will receive the sozo that the others missed, and longing for us to return, not for his sake but for ours. The invitation of the morning is always the invitation of the road where Jesus was standing. Return to the giver. Not because he needs your gratitude, because you need what only the returning can give you. I want to ask you something that I do not want you to answer quickly. I want you to actually sit with it for a moment, even if you are watching this in the middle of a busy morning. What is one thing God has done for you that you have not yet fully turned back to thank him for? Not a general category of blessing, one specific thing, a moment, a provision, a person, a rescue, something that happened and that you recognized as his hand, and then, like the 9, kept moving toward the next thing without ever quite falling at his feet about it. I want you to pause this video if you need to. Find that thing, and bring it back to him today in whatever posture your morning allows. Standing, sitting, kneeling on the kitchen floor. Return to the giver. Say the words, fall on your face, and receive, in the returning, what was always waiting for you there. Teaching 8. We have talked about the morning as the hour of the altar and the hour of encounter, the hour of kava and the hour of the still small voice. But there is one more thing the morning is, and it is perhaps the most intimate of all the things it is. The morning is the hour of the face. Not the hand of God, the provision, the miracle, the intervention in circumstances. The face, and to seek someone's face is to seek their gaze, to ask for their full attention, to want to be known by them in the particular and irreplaceable way that eye contact, even spiritual eye contact, makes possible. There is a blessing in Numbers 6 that was given to Aaron to speak over the people of Israel, and it is one of the oldest liturgical texts in the world. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Three movements, each one deeper than the last. First, blessing and keeping, the hand of God, the provision and protection. Second, the face of God shining on you, a step closer, more intimate, more particular. Third, the countenance lifted toward you, the full attention of God, his face turned entirely in your direction, giving peace. The progression moves from what God does to what God is, from the action to the face, from the general blessing to the most specific and personal form of divine attention, the face of God turned entirely toward you. When you come to God in the morning before the world wakes up, you are stepping into the blessing of Aaron. You are asking for the face. You are positioning yourself in the space where the countenance of God can be lifted toward you, and in that space, in the specific, unhurried, undivided attention of the gaze of God upon your particular soul, peace is given. Not peace as the absence of conflict, not peace as a feeling that everything is fine, but the Hebrew shalom, which is the peace of completeness, the peace of nothing missing, the peace of a soul that has been seen by the one whose seeing is itself a form of healing. We live in a world of partial attention. The people who love us most still divide their gaze between us and the screen, between us and the worry, between us and the next thing. We are, most of us, chronically underseen, not because the people in our lives do not love us, but because partial attention is the currency of a world that is moving too fast for anyone to fully stop and truly look. But God does not have partial attention. God does not scroll past you to see what else is happening. When you come to him in the morning, the face that turns toward you turns without distraction, without division, without the pull of any other claim on his attention. Because he is infinite, and his gaze toward you takes nothing away from anyone else, and yet it is entirely yours. The most fully seen you will ever be is in the moment when you bring yourself to the morning and allow the face of God to be lifted toward you. And here is what the shining face of God does to a soul that receives it. It reflects. Moses came down from the mountain after being in the presence of God, and his face shone so brightly that the Israelites asked him to put a veil over it. He had been in the company of the face of God, and the encounter was visible on him. This is not a metaphor for glowing positivity or spiritual performance. It is the literal description of what happens when a human soul is exposed to the presence of God long enough. It begins to carry something of that light into every space it enters. The people around you today, in your home, in your workplace, in your neighborhood, they will not know why there is something different about you. They may not be able to name it. But the morning changes something in the face of the one who has been with God, and that changed face is a form of witness that requires no words and no religious argument. It is simply the light of a face that has been toward the face of God. There is a phrase in that Aaronic blessing that I have been returning to for years, and it is this: "The Lord lift up his countenance upon you." In Hebrew, the word for lift up is nasa, the same word used for carrying a burden, for lifting something heavy. And when it is used in connection with God's face, it carries the image of God actively turning, actively directing, actively lifting his gaze toward you. Not passively receiving your prayer, but initiating the movement of his own face in your direction. The countenance of God does not simply shine on you from a neutral position. It is lifted toward you. It is aimed at you. It has been moved by the love and intention of God himself in your specific direction. You are not someone the face of God occasionally passes over. You are someone toward whom the face of God is actively lifted every morning before you have done a single thing to deserve the attention. This is the peace that follows, the shalom that completes the blessing. Not peace as tranquility achieved, but peace as the natural consequence of being fully seen and known and loved by the one whose seeing and knowing and loving are without any deficiency. When the face of God is lifted toward you, there is nothing missing in that encounter, not information. He knows you completely, not attention. He is not distracted, not love. It is the very nature of his being. In that moment of face-to-face, even when the face is invisible to your physical eyes, even when the encounter is felt more than seen, you are as whole as a human being can be in this life. Shalom. Nothing missing, everything held. The countenance lifted and the peace given, and the morning, which began as just another beginning, becomes instead an encounter with the one who turns his face toward you and will not look away. I want to tell you what this shining face does not require from you, because I think this is the place where many of us silently disqualify ourselves from receiving it. The blessing in number 6 is not conditional. Aaron was not told to speak it over the people who had performed well enough, or who had kept their hearts clean enough, or who had earned the right to the lifted countenance by the quality of their spiritual record. He was told to speak it over the people, all of them, the ones who were faithful and the ones who were struggling and the ones who were somewhere in between, which is most of us most of the time. The shining face of God is not a reward for the spiritually accomplished. It is a gift to those who come. And what you bring when you come to the morning is not your track record, it is your presence, and your presence is all the morning requires. I want to go a little deeper into what the phrase "make his face shine" actually means in the original Hebrew, because the word used there, or, is the same word used for light in the creation narrative. "Let there be light," God said, and the word was or. The shining of God's face toward you is not a dim warmth or a general benevolence. It is the same creative light that called the world into existence. When the face of God shines on you in the morning, something is being created in you, something new, something that was not there before the encounter, something that the darkness of the previous night could not produce, and the noise of the coming day cannot manufacture. The morning is the hour of creative light, the hour when the face of God shines over the specific, unrepeatable life that you are living, and creates in it something that your own effort and intelligence and willpower could never produce on their own. Think about what light actually does to the things it falls on. It does not change their nature, it reveals their nature. A painting does not become beautiful when the light falls on it. It was beautiful in the dark too. The light simply makes visible what was already there. When the face of God shines on you in the morning, when the countenance of the Lord is lifted in your direction, something of the truth of who you are in His eyes begins to become visible to you. Not the version of yourself that your fear narrates, not the version that your failures have constructed, but the version that God has been holding all along, the one He called before you were born, the one He knew before you knew yourself, the one He made in His own image and has been working to restore to the fullness of that image through every season of your complicated, imperfect, still-in-progress life. The shining face does not create the truth of who you are, it illuminates it. And the morning is where you stand in the light long enough to begin to see yourself the way God has always seen you. And there is one more dimension of the face of God that I want to leave you with before this teaching closes, because it is perhaps the most tender thing I know about what it means to be seen by God in those early, unguarded morning hours. The Psalms tell us again and again that God looks at the heart, not the performance, not the outer presentation, not the version of ourselves that we have prepared for public view. The heart, the inner room, the real place, the one that holds the things we are not sure anyone else can know about and still love us. And the morning is the hour when the heart is most exposed. Before the day has given us the opportunity to construct the presentations and manage the impressions and organize the face we show the world, the heart is simply there, still tender from the night, still soft from the sleep, still close to the surface in a way that it will not be once the day has fully begun. And it is precisely that exposed, unguarded, unperformed heart that the face of God is lifted toward. He is not looking at your best self. He is looking at your true self. And what he sees there, in all its longing and confusion and weariness and love, is something he calls worth shining on, worth giving peace to, worth lifting his countenance toward. Every single morning, without exception, without condition, without waiting for you to be ready. Teaching 9. Everything we have been building toward in these 9 teachings comes to a single point. And the point is this: the morning is the place where the soul is most available to receive what God has been holding for it all through the night. And what God holds for you through the night is not arbitrary. It is specific to you, to this season, to this particular configuration of your life, with all of its beauty and its fracture. The mercy that is new every morning is not generic. It is addressed. It has your name on it. Lamentations 3 is one of the darkest passages in all of Scripture. It is the cry of a person who has lost almost everything, who has been brought to a place of such complete desolation that they describe God himself as the source of their suffering. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. He has aged my flesh and my skin and broken my bones. This is not a psalm of triumphant faith. This is the raw, uncensored language of a soul in the ruins of everything it had built. And yet, in the middle of that desolation, not at the end when things have gotten better, but in the middle, the writer says, "This I recall to mind, therefore I have hope. Through the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness." New every morning. Not new when the crisis is over. Not new when I have managed to find a better perspective. New every morning, including this one, including the morning after the worst night, including the morning when the ruins are still visible and the rebuilding has not yet begun. The mercy of God does not wait for your circumstances to improve before it refreshes. It arrives on schedule, morning schedule, regardless of what happened yesterday. This is the great faithfulness. Not that everything always works out in the time frame we expect, but that the mercy never runs out. That every morning, without exception, the supply is replenished. That you cannot exhaust it by yesterday's need, because yesterday is already behind you, and today's mercy is already here, already new, already addressed and already given. But I need to sit with the writer of Lamentations for a moment before we move past him, because this decision to declare the newness of mercy in the middle of the ruins is not a small thing. It is a monumental act of spiritual will, performed not from the mountain of answered prayer, but from the valley of ongoing grief. The Book of Lamentations is not a narrative of restoration. It is a narrative of devastation. Jerusalem has fallen, the temple has been destroyed, the people have been carried away. And somewhere in the middle of the rubble, the writer looks at the sky and chooses to call to mind something. Not the evidence of God's faithfulness that is currently visible in the ruins. Something older, something deeper. A memory of mercy that predates the ruins and will outlast them, that has been reliable morning after morning after morning, for as long as he can remember, and that, in the darkness of the present moment, he chooses to name as still reliable now. This is the act of morning gratitude at its most courageous, not the gratitude of the morning when everything is fine, but the gratitude chosen in the morning when nothing is resolved. When the prayer is still unanswered, when the ruins are still smoking, the writer of Lamentations does not manufacture a feeling. He makes a choice. This I recall to mind. He goes looking for something true, even when everything around him argues against it. And what he finds, in the act of recalling, in the deliberate turning of the mind toward the mercy that has not failed, is hope. not the hope of circumstances improving, the hope of a mercy that cannot be exhausted, offered by a God whose faithfulness is great enough to show up even in the worst morning of the worst season of the worst year of a life. There is a quality to the phrase, "Great is your faithfulness," that I want us to sit with, because it is spoken into the ruins, and it means something specific there that it cannot fully mean when spoken from a place of comfort. In the ruins, great faithfulness does not mean God prevented the ruins. It means that even in the ruins, even after the fall of everything you trusted and built and believed in, the mercy is still new this morning. The faithfulness is great, not because it has protected you from loss, but because it has not abandoned you inside it. This is one of the most important theological distinctions in all of Scripture, and it is the one that most of us need most desperately in the seasons when God feels least obvious. The faithfulness of God is not measured by whether our circumstances remain intact. It is measured by whether His mercy keeps showing up in the morning. And the testimony of Lamentations, written from the ashes of everything, is that it does. It always does. Even here, even now, even on this particular morning, which may be the hardest one yet. The mercy that is new every morning is also specific in a way that I want you to receive deeply, because there is a temptation to hear "new every morning" as a general theological promise, a kind of spiritual reset that applies to everyone equally, and therefore to no one in particular. But the mercy that arrives in your morning is not generic. It is calibrated to your exact situation. It takes into account everything that happened yesterday, every weight you are still carrying from the night, every fracture in the places where your life has not yet been healed. The God who knows the number of hairs on your head does not send you a general purpose mercy at dawn. He sends the specific one, the one shaped for the exact contours of your need, arriving at exactly the moment when you are most open to receive it, bearing exactly the grace you did not know how to ask for and cannot manufacture yourself. I want to notice something about the structure of the declaration in Lamentations 3 that tells us everything about how genuine hope works in the darkest seasons. The writer does not say, "Things are getting better, therefore I have hope." He says, "This I recall to mind, therefore I have hope." The hope does not come from changed circumstances. It comes from a chosen act of remembrance. He goes looking backward, not into his own memory of personal success or past victories, but into his memory of God's character, God's track record, God's nature, as the one whose compassions do not fail. And in the act of finding that memory and holding it up against the present darkness, the darkness does not disappear, but something shifts anyway. Hope enters, not as a feeling that arrives unbidden, but as the consequence of a choice, the deliberate, willful choice to name what is true about God, even when nothing about the current moment is confirming it. This is the inner architecture of the morning prayer at its most honest and most powerful. On the days when the circumstances have not changed, on the days when the answer has not yet arrived, on the days when the ruins are still exactly as ruined as they were yesterday, on those days, the morning prayer is the act of looking backward before you go looking forward, of saying, "What do I know about you? What has been true about your mercies in every other morning? I have brought my need to you." And of choosing, in the light of that backward looking, to say, "Great is your faithfulness," not because today has proven it, because every morning before today has proven it. And the God who was faithful in all of those mornings is the same God who is here in this one, and his faithfulness is not a resource that the difficulty of my current season can diminish. I want to sit for one more moment in this word compassions, because it is the word that anchors the entire declaration. His compassions fail not. In Hebrew, the word is rachamim, a word that shares its root with the word for womb. The compassions of God in the Hebrew imagination are not the distant sympathy of a being who observes your suffering from a position of comfort and feels mildly concerned. They are womb compassions, the visceral, physical, inseparable from identity compassion of a mother for the child she has carried, the love that is constitutive of who she is and cannot be separated from her selfhood. The compassions of God for you are that kind of compassion. They are not generated by your performance and withdrawn when your performance falters. They are not a supply that fluctuates based on the quality of your spiritual state. They are what God is, Rachamim, womb love, the love of a creator for whom you are not a project or a responsibility, but a beloved, carried, deeply known life, whose suffering moves the deepest part of his being. These are the compassions that do not fail, not because they are great in quantity, though they are, but because they are rooted in who God is, and who God is cannot fail, and therefore his compassions toward you cannot fail, and therefore the mercy that was new for you this morning will be new for you tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and in every morning of every season that still lies ahead of you. But here is what I need you to receive in this 9th teaching, because we are almost at the end, and I want you to carry this into teaching 10, ready to receive the full weight of it. The mercy that is new every morning is not just for your survival. It is not just God keeping you from being consumed by what could consume you, though that is extraordinary enough. The mercy is for your flourishing. The mercy is the means by which God accomplishes in you what you cannot accomplish in yourself. The healing of the old wounds, the mending of the fractured places, the growth of the new things that have been dormant in the hard season, waiting for the conditions of enough morning grace to finally push through the soil. The morning is not just the beginning of another day. It is the arrival of another installment of a mercy so vast and so faithful that your entire life could not exhaust its supply. I want you to go into teaching 10 carrying that. Carrying the altar of Psalm 5, and the still small voice, and the face of God, and the carver, and the 21 days, and the throne cloak, and the leper who returned, and the new mercy. Carry all of it. Because teaching 10 is where all of these threads come together into something you are going to need, not just for today, but for every morning that follows this one. Teaching 10. We have traveled a long way together in this video. We began before dawn, before the world was awake, before the noise had started, in that thin and holy margin of time where everything is still possible. We stood at the altar of Psalm 5 and learned what it means to arrange our prayers like an offering. We sat under the juniper tree with Elijah and heard the still, small voice that meets the most depleted places in us. We read David's face-seeking in Psalm 27 and let ourselves want the face of God more than we want his hand. We twisted ourselves around the strength of God in Isaiah 40 and received the rope of Kava, not the strength of discipline, but the strength of being intertwined. We stood in the gap with Daniel through 21 days of faithful, unseen intercession and learned that the first day of prayer is the day the answer begins to move. We threw our cloak like Bartimaeus and ran toward the voice that was calling us by name. We turned back like the single grateful leper and received the difference between healed and whole. We stood in the Aaron blessing and felt the face of God shining toward us. We read the new mercy of Lamentations in the middle of the ruins and chose hope, not because the ruins were gone, but because the mercy was real. All of it has been leading here, to this final teaching, to the thing I told you in the introduction I had spent more time on than anything else in this script. And I am going to tell you what it is now, because you have stayed and you have listened, and you deserve to receive the full weight of it. The promise of meeting God before the world wakes up is not that your days will become easier. It is that you will become someone who can carry harder days without breaking. It is that the anchor described in the title of this video, the anchor for your day, is not a feeling of peace that you maintain by managing your circumstances carefully enough. It is a person. It is the presence of a God who was awake before you, who arranged the morning before you opened your eyes, who had mercy prepared for you before you knew you needed it. The anchor is not a practice. The anchor is a person. And every morning you come to meet that person. You are not building a routine. You are building a relationship. And relationships do something that routines cannot do. They change you over time, at depth, in ways that gradually become visible in everything you touch. This is the final revelation of the title. You do not meet God before the world wakes up in order to have a better morning. You meet God before the world wakes up because you are in a relationship with the living God of the universe, and He has been inviting you to this meeting every single day of your life. And every morning you come is a morning that counts, not toward a spiritual achievement, but toward the person you are becoming, the soul that is being shaped, the depth of knowing and being known that is available to every human life that will bring itself to this threshold. Let me pray with you now. Let me bring this into the prayer I promised you, the prayer for the one who woke up tired, the one who is carrying something that has been heavy for a long time, the one who is in the 21st day of waiting and is not sure they can keep going. Father, we come to you now at the threshold of this day. And we come not because we have everything arranged perfectly, not because our faith is without trembling, not because our circumstances have resolved into something easy to offer. We come because you called us. We come because you said, "Seek my face," and something deep and inarguable in us said, "Your face, Lord, we will seek." We come with our single threads, fraying, insufficient, worn thin by seasons that asked more of us than we knew we had to give. And we give them to you now, because we know that in your hands they become rope, and rope becomes the thing that holds. We bring to you the weight that has not been named yet this morning, the one that was already there when the eyes opened, the one that has not responded to our best human coping, the one that we have been carrying in the presence of everyone around us and trying not to let them see how heavy it actually is. You see it, Lord. You know the exact shape of it, the exact origin of it, the exact number of days we have been carrying it. And your word says that you give power to the faint, not to the strong, to the faint. So we come faint and we ask for power, not the power of our own recovered strength, but the power of the Lord who never grows weary, who never reaches the end of his resource, who never looks at our need and decides it is too much. We bring to you the prayers that feel like they are hitting the ceiling, Lord. The ones we have prayed for weeks and months and years and cannot yet see moving. And we receive the testimony of Daniel that from the first day you heard. From the first day, the answer was dispatched. We cannot see what is moving in the unseen places on our behalf, but we choose today to believe what the angel told him. From the first day, our first day is already behind us. The answer is already in motion. We choose, in this morning, to hold open the channel of our faithful prayer for one more day. We bring to you the places where we are still carrying the cloak, the old survival mechanisms, the managed distances, the armor that has protected us from hoping too much. And we do what Bartimaeus did. We throw it. We throw it now in this prayer, in the act of actually running toward you instead of sitting cautiously in the same spot we have always sat. Call us, and we will run. Lord, call us, and we will leave behind whatever the old life required and run toward the voice of the one who calls us by name. We bring to you our gratitude, even in the places where it is not yet fully formed, even in the ruins of Lamentations, where the mercy is new and the ruins are still visible. We say, as an act of will, before it is fully an act of feeling, great is your faithfulness, great is your faithfulness. We believe it, Lord. We believe it even on the days when belief is the hardest thing we do, especially on those days, mostly on those days. And we receive the face of God turned toward us now. The shining face, the lifted countenance, the full and undivided and eternally faithful gaze of a God who is not too busy for us, not too occupied with larger concerns to notice us, not checking the news while we pray. The face is toward us. The peace that belongs to those who have been seen by the one whose seeing heals. We receive it now. Shalom. Completeness. Nothing missing. Everything held. The countenance lifted and the peace given, and the morning, which could have been just another beginning, becomes instead the morning where we were fully met. Carry us into this day, Lord. Carry us by the strength of the morning meeting, by the mercy that arrived new and addressed before we woke, by the rope of cover that intertwines our weakness with your inexhaustible power. Make us the leper who returned. Make us the voice of the still small sound, heard by the ones around us who have been running so long they have forgotten what quiet feels like. Make us the face that carries something of the light of yours into every room we enter today. We pray this in the name of Jesus, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and whose voice is still calling us by name, still standing still and asking, "What do you want me to do for you?" Amen. I want to say something to you now, not as a spiritual lesson, but simply as one person to another who is on this journey together. There is a community that gathers around this channel. Not just a subscriber count, but real people who are hungry for what you have been hungry for in this video. People who bring their fraying threads to morning prayer and are learning what it means to twist them around the strength of God. People who are in the 21st day, or the 41st, or the 400th, and who have chosen not to stop. If you are looking for that community, if you want to be part of a group that prays together, encourages one another, and continues to go deeper into the things we have explored today, the information about how to join is available through this channel. Not because you owe us anything, not because the content is gated behind a paywall, simply because some of us need to do this together, and together is stronger than alone, and the rope of kava is made of multiple threads. To those of you who stayed until the end of this video, all the way through 10 teachings and a closing prayer and everything in between, I want to say something from the truest place I know how to speak from. Thank you. Not as a formula, not as a content creator sign-off. Thank you, because I know what it cost you to stay. I know that the world was awake long before this video ended, and the demands came, and the notifications buzzed, and the morning ran ahead of you, and you stayed anyway. That staying is itself a form of prayer. It is a statement made in the small acts of your attention that this matters, that meeting God matters, that the anchor matters, that the journey is worth taking even when it is long. Before the end screen appears, I want to ask you one final thing. Not a comment, not a share. Though both of those things genuinely help more people find their way to this kind of content, I want to ask you to make a commitment, a real one, made in the hearing of the God we have been meeting together in this video. And the commitment is simply this. Tomorrow morning, before the world wakes up, you will come back to the altar. You will bring your thread. You will seek the face. You will say, "From the first day, I am meeting you here." You will hold open the channel. You will throw the cloak. You will declare with the faith that has been building through everything you have watched today. Great is your faithfulness, not because tomorrow will be easy, because the anchor holds, because the mercy is new, because the face of God is toward you, and it has been toward you all along. And the morning is the place where you finally stop long enough to let that be the truest thing you know. There are videos appearing on your screen right now, suggested by this channel, curated for those who have come this far and are ready to go further. I encourage you to let one of them be the next thing you watch. Not today, necessarily, but when the morning comes again, and the world is still quiet, and you are looking for a place to begin, come back. The altar will be here, the mercy will be new, and God will be already awake, already waiting, already holding the morning in his hands, like something precious, like something he has been preparing especially for you. You came here looking for something today. I hope you found it. I hope that somewhere in the 10 teachings, in the prayers and the promises and the people we walked through the Bible with, something settled into a place in you that was waiting to be filled. And I hope that tomorrow morning, before the first notification, before the first demand, before the world opens its eyes, you will find your way to the threshold of the morning and stand there in the thin, holy air and bring your soul to the altar and say, I am here. I'm meeting God before the world wakes up. And he will say, as he has always said, as he will always say, I know. I have been here. I have been waiting for you. Come. Let that be the last word of this video and the first word of every morning that follows it. Not a word about what you need to do, a word about what has already been done and what has already been prepared, and what is already waiting at the threshold of every new day of your life. The morning is always already holy before you arrive at it. That holiness is not something you bring. It is something you step into. The mercy is always already new before your eyes open to it. The face of God is always already turned in your direction, the countenance already lifted, the peace already prepared, before you have done a single thing to orient yourself toward it. And the invitation that opened this video, to meet God before the world wakes up, is not an invitation to produce something spiritual. It is an invitation to receive something that has already been prepared. Every morning you come to that threshold, something was waiting there for you. Something specific to you, calibrated to your need, addressed to your name, held in the hands of a God who has never once failed to show up for the morning meeting. He is already there. He has always been already there, patient and present and full, holding everything you need for this day in hands that have never once let anything truly important fall. The only question that remains is whether you will come. And I believe, with everything in me, from everything we have walked through together today, that you will, that you already have, that the coming, imperfect and early and uncertain as it sometimes is already counting. Come, he is waiting.